Cool. Okay, so we're going to get started here. So hi, everyone. I'm Danielle, the National Educator at Four Sigmatic. And first off, happy National Mushroom Day. I am so excited to be chatting with you all and doing this Q&A and a little deep dive into functional fungi on this very special day, October 15th. And I encourage you all to ask questions throughout this, but as well, if you're watching this later as a recording, feel free to let me know any questions that you have about the fungi kingdom, any of the main mushrooms we talk about, or really anything you want to know. My greater intention is to let you know that I exist as a resource for all of you, as well as our amazing customer service team. So we are here to answer your mushroom questions at any time. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the fungi kingdom. So maybe you know this, but fungi are, they're actually their own kingdom. So we're part of the animal kingdom, there's the plant kingdom, and then there's the fungi kingdom separate. And this actually wasn't even discovered until the early 60s. They were thought to be a lower form of plant. And we now know that they're incredibly different from many of the species in the plant kingdom, and this is a vast kingdom. So there's at least 6 times as many species in the fungi kingdom as all plants on Earth. And I just want you all to think about that for a moment. So think of every fruit, vegetable, tree, shrub, grass, grain, this whole diverse world of plants. And then there's 6 times as many species of fungi. And so often, many of us know of a few culinary varieties, maybe some that you're scared of, these poisonous mushrooms, perhaps psychedelic mushrooms, and then of course the functional mushrooms that you're using when you are taking Four Sigmatic products. But just to kind of zoom out a little bit and realize how vast of a kingdom this is. And from there, starting from this really wide zoomed lens, we're going to begin to narrow that focus. So knowing there's 6 to 1 in terms of fungi to plants. And then within that, only about 1.5% of all fungi have been classified to date. So there's still so much room for unknown and discovery within this field. Zooming in even further, less than 100 species have even been integrated into human activities. And so this includes fungi for pharmaceuticals, right? We know that about 40% of pharmaceuticals come from some sort of fungi. This includes fungi that are used for farming and gardening purposes. So the strains that we call mycorrhiza, right? Myco meaning fungi or mushroom, and rhizo being root. So over 90% of plants on Earth are dependent on a symbiotic mycorrhiza connection. So this partner fungi. This includes all of the culinary mushrooms, and then of course all of the functional mushrooms that we use in Four Sigmatic and that you might see in the supplement aisle. So 100 species have been integrated into all human activities. And then zooming in even further, only 24 of these are commonly cultivated, and only 7 mushroom species are grown on a mass scale. So I just love beginning with this, and my slide title here is Fungi the Unknown, because there's, regardless of what we're talking about today, and as you begin to gather more information and knowledge and wisdom around functional fungi, I encourage you to continue to keep your eyes open and dig deeper into how much this kingdom has to offer, because there's still so much unknown. I'm learning more every single day myself, and that's what keeps this so exciting. So a couple basics for you all. We just talked about fungi being their own kingdom, and humans, us humans, are actually closer related to fungi than we are to plants. We share about 40% of our DNA with them. And this could be a whole nother podcast here if you guys are curious about what similarities we have with fungi. I would love to dive deep into that with you as well. There's a lot of really fun facts there. A couple of my favorite are the way that we digest food is really similar to fungi. So where plants photosynthesize, right, they get their energy from the sun and then can convert that into nutrients. Fungi need to get their nutrition from an outside source, similar to the way we do. And if you think of the way our stomach works, secreting enzymes to break down food and thus nourish us, fungi, you can think of them kind of living in a bath of the nutrients that they need to sustain themselves. So they actually secrete enzymes from what are called hyphal tips. So you all have probably heard the word mycelium, and mycelium is this vast network. You can think of it like the root system of the mushroom. And the mycelial network is comprised of these little thread-like hairs that are called hyphae. And at the end of each hyphae, there's what's called a hyphal tip, and it's really enzymatic rich and actually secretes digestive enzymes as it moves about through the soil or through the wood or whatever substrate it's growing upon. And so really interesting that we both, humans and fungi, need external nutrients to be able to nourish ourselves and have food to continue to evolve and thrive. So many more ways in which we share our DNA, which can be for another conversation, but do let me know if you're curious about that topic. A couple other basics. So mushrooms are vital to the ecosystem. I mentioned mycorrhiza, and as an herbalist, this is something that is really important to me because I feel so much love and lore is given to many of our plants. And fungi are truly these secret underground allies that are supporting the plants and offering nutrients to keep the plant sustained and alive. So as I mentioned, over 90% of all of plants on Earth have this symbiotic relationship with fungi. And then other ways mushrooms are vital to the ecosystem is this idea of mycoremediation. And so this is a science that we're discovering that you can actually train different strains of fungi to be able to basically remediate, so pull out certain heavy metals or toxins from waste sites or heavy metal sites. So really incredible. Yes, someone's tuning in and saying, it sounds like mushrooms could save the world. And it's true. I really believe that. So mycorrhiza, mycoremediation, many different ways that mushrooms are vital to ecology and environmental health. And then there's three distinct parts, and you may have heard this before, but within what we call the mushroom itself, there's actually three different parts. So there's the mycelium, which I mentioned. You can think of like the root system. And then what we think of as the actual mushroom is the fruiting body. So that's more like the apple on the tree. And then there's spores, which are found within the cap of the mushroom. And those can be thought of like mushroom seeds. And this is important to know when we're talking about mushrooms in the supplement world, because different companies will be using different parts of the species itself. So understanding what you're getting is really important to knowing the potency and the necessary extraction types. Are you getting mycelium? Are you getting a fruiting body? What part of the fungi are you ingesting? And we can go over why you might choose different parts and how to know if you're getting a mycelium product or a fruiting body product. At Four Sigmatic, we're really committed to using the fruiting body. I'll mention that. And that's truly where the tradition and history of functional mushrooms comes from. So in all of the 5,000 plus years of humans using mushrooms as medicine, the part that they've always used, so that you'll find stories of or written up in traditional materia medicas, right? These are encyclopedias of different herb and fungi medicine. It's always been the mushroom itself, this fruiting body. That's what's above ground. That's what was accessible. And only in the last 20, 30 years has there been a growing trend of using mycelium, so using this root system, which must be grown in a lab. So this kind of brings us to my next slide, and a few other reasons to point out why to use the fruiting body as opposed to the mycelium. So not only is the tradition and folklore and history there, we also have science to back this up. So we know that there are about 1% to 2% of active compounds in the mycelium versus about 30 to 40% in the fruiting body. So both the tradition and the science are showing us that the fruiting body is really the most potent, strong, powerful part of the fungi species, the mushroom itself. And I love this image here. These are pearl oysters. And you can see on the left side, this white kind of, if you guys have ever dug in soil and seen that white stringy stuff, this is what's happening here on the left. So that's the mycelium. That's this massive mycelium. And then you can see the fruiting bodies, these oyster mushrooms, are emerging from that myceliated substrate. And I'll just read you this quote from Peter McCoy, who's amazing, and he's the man that taught me to grow mushrooms. And he says, if the entirety of Earth's history was compressed to a 24-hour clock, and today was midnight on that clock, so we've lived through that whole day, fungi may have evolved as long as 18 hours and 40 minutes ago. In comparison, modern humans would have only existed for 1 second. Just mind-blowing to think of the ancestry that fungi hold. And I love telling people that at Four Sigmatic, we're not doing anything new. And they say, of course you are, Danielle, you're making mushroom coffee a thing, but drinking mushrooms is really nothing new. There's so many different cultures, from Russian folklore to Siberia to traditional Chinese medicine. And so many of these people have been drinking mushrooms as medicine for thousands of years. And so we're really just reviving a tradition and offering these ancient remedies in a way that makes sense for the Western world, right? For our busy, modern, crazy lives. And that's what we're doing at Four Sigmatic. So jumping in, we talked about fungi being this vast kingdom. And then within that, just to break it down really simple, there's the fungi that grow from the earth, and those are going to be most of our culinary mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, poisonous mushrooms. They're all going to be growing on the ground. And the mushrooms that we're talking about primarily grow on trees. And there's several hundred what we refer to as functional mushrooms. And what that means is mushrooms that have known studied benefits to the human body. And within that group of a couple hundred, we're really going to focus on 4 today. And these are the 4 key players that we use in Four Sigmatic. And they are also the 4 mushrooms that are kind of taking the spotlight in the mushroom world today. And I think the reason for that is humans, especially us in the West, really need the support that these mushrooms can offer us. So of course, our queen of mushrooms is where we'll begin. This is a beautiful picture of reishi. The Latin for reishi is Ganoderma lucidum. And you may all know this, reishi supports sleep and occasional stress. And I put a fun fact on here. So this regal fungus has been revered as a miracle elixir since the days when it was reserved for use only by emperors and other royalty in ancient China. It has even been depicted as the bridge between heaven and earth. So really sacred fungi. And if people don't know where to begin with the world of functional mushrooms, I always recommend starting with reishi. So we can find reishi in many of our products, and I listed them here. And hopefully all of you have experimented with reishi and tried her and have experienced how powerful she can be for so many different areas of your life. I love to say there's so many things that we don't even associate with stress, whether it's digestive issues or headaches. And it's amazing to see when the stress is supported, what seemingly unrelated symptoms begin to go away. So that's kind of reishi's magic. Moving on to lion's mane, here's Siam erinaceus, and lion's mane is our think mushroom. So we call lion's mane like a hug for your brain, and lion's mane supports productivity and focus. And when we first began, so many people would ask us, is your lion's mane vegan? And so I love to say this fun fact, there is no lions harmed in the making of your Four Sigmatic lion's mane elixir mushroom coffee. Lion's mane gets its name from its puffy mane of cascading white strands. So it has nothing to do with the actual mane of lion. Moving on, we have chaga. Chaga is our be well mushroom. And while we refer to reishi as the queen of mushrooms, we call chaga the king of mushrooms, or in this slide, I say the big daddy. And chaga helps support immune function and is really full of antioxidant properties which support overall well-being. And chaga is a fabulous coffee alternative. So it has a bitter, earthy flavor to it. And this fun fact is that during World War II, Finns, as many of you may know, we have our roots in Finland as at Four Sigmatic, and Finns actually substituted chaga tea for coffee during coffee rations. And this might not seem like that big of a deal until you know that Finns actually drink more coffee per capita than any other country on earth. It's like 5-6 cups a day. It's crazy. And so when they were having issues importing sufficient amounts of coffee, the whole country freaked out and they said, what can we turn to? And they realized that chaga mushroom grows quite abundantly on birch trees in Finland. And so it became a really popular alternative to that morning cup of coffee. And just a note here, we sustainably wild harvest our chaga from the taiga forest, which is the largest birch forest in the world. It's in Siberia. And this is really important because so much of what makes chaga chaga, and really all the mushrooms, is what they're growing from. So you can think of this as you are what you eat. Many of you may have heard this. The mushrooms too, they are what they eat. So growing mushrooms from the woods or logs or trees that they're found on in nature is really critical to ensuring that the mushrooms are the true mushroom that has been used and studied for all these hundreds, if not thousands of years. And finally, we have cordyceps. So cordyceps is our get-going mushroom. And we use Cordyceps militaris here at Four Sigmatic. And cordyceps is supporting energy, endurance, and stamina. And if you are looking at this image here and maybe getting a weird feeling in your belly, this is a wild cordyceps. And found in the wild, cordyceps are actually a parasite, as are several different fungi species. So in our last slide, chaga is a parasite to birch trees. And alternatively, cordyceps is a parasite in the wild to Himalayan bat moths. And so it was originally harvested really high up in the Himalayan mountains, up above 13,000 feet. And Sherpas, or mountain climbers, actually saw yaks, so these big furry Himalayan animals, eating the cordyceps. And they had all this energy and were jumping around. And the Sherpas thought, wow, what's going on? And studied what they were doing. And then they started ingesting the cordyceps themselves and realized that they were able to hike to higher altitudes, that they were able to breathe better when the oxygen got thinner. And so that's kind of where the roots of cordyceps come from. And one note about the ethics and sustainability with our cordyceps is this is one fungi that we do not wild harvest due to sustainability reasons. It's pretty wild. You see Nepalese children on their hands and feet harvesting wild cordyceps for more than the price of gold. And so part of our practices as a company is to not support those type of methods. And instead, this is the one mushroom that we do grow in a lab. And the other reason for that is we're a vegan plant-based company. So no insects are involved in the cordyceps mushroom coffee and cordyceps elixir cacao that you might be drinking. So that's kind of a brief overview of the 4 mushrooms that you may know and love and have been drinking often. I have a question coming in that says, what is your favorite functional mushroom right now? And I'm just going to go to this Q&A page and then I can open that back up. So for me today on National Mushroom Day, and this answer changes all the time, but today my favorite mushroom is chaga. And something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is what's called the doctrine of signatures. And so many of you may have heard this in terms of plants. So it's the idea that what something looks like or where it grows can give us information about what that plant or what that fungi can do for our bodies. So for example, the walnut being good for the brain, or looking at a plant saying, oh, that kind of looks like an organ. This looks like a kidney, or could that possibly be good for kidney health in the body? And with chaga, I've been thinking a lot about where it grows. And as I mentioned, it's found in really cold climates. So up in Scandinavia, up in Russia, these places where for a large part of the year, there's minimal exposure to the sun. And with that, humans in those that live in those areas are more vulnerable to free radicals being released in their bodies, right? They don't have as much protection as kind of more melanin rich skin, darker skin types that are living closer to the equator. And chaga is so full of antioxidant properties, which is one of the best supports for maybe paler people that are living in more northern climates. And so even though you might not be wild harvesting mushrooms in your backyard, knowing, okay, what environment do you live in and what needs might be most supportive for you, and then choosing a Four Sigmatic product based on what can support you, and just learning more about where these mushrooms come from, the history of them is such a fun way to explore what they could really be doing in our own bodies. So we have a few more here. Aside from the part of the mushroom used, what are other important things to consider when buying functional mushroom supplements? You mentioned we might be able to dive into this. Yes, great question. So let me actually, I'm going to stop this share. And great. So a few things that I really want you guys to look for. I'm going to choose 3 things. One is, what part of the mushroom are you using? And we talked a lot today about mycelium versus fruiting body, and the tradition and history being with the fruiting body as well as the potency and the science. So that's the first thing. Look for if it says mushroom or if it says fruiting body, and that'll give you the clue that it's the actual mushroom versus the word mycelium. And the second thing to look for, if possible, is where is your mushroom growing on? Or where is it growing from? What is the substrate it's growing on? And so log grown or wild harvested is really important to get the true functional mushroom. And the last thing is extraction. So this is really, really important. Mushrooms should never be eaten raw. We're going to start with that. And fungi need to be extracted for all of the beneficial compounds to become bioavailable to our bodies. So all of those things we mentioned, lion's mane supporting our brain and chaga having antioxidant properties, all of that is basically bound up within the mushroom. And unless that fungi has been extracted, there's no way for the human body to access all of that, all of those beneficial compounds. So we can get a little deeper into extraction in perhaps a different webinar, but what I want you all to know is extraction is absolutely critical. And there's 2 main ways to extract a mushroom and break down this compound in their cell wall that's called chitin. And the 2 traditional ways are through heat, so through a long hot water tea, which we call a decoction, or through alcohol, which is through a tincture. And each of these extraction methods are going to be pulling out different compounds from the functional mushroom. So we kind of have these 2 big groups of compounds, and you don't have to remember all this, but we have basically the sugars and the oils. So the sugars, they're called the beta glucans, the oils are called the terpenes. And when you make these 2 forms of extraction, you're pulling out primarily one group of these compounds or another. So when you make the long hot water boil, that decoction, you're mostly pulling out your sugars, right? Your beta glucans. It's sugar dissolved in water. Think of making simple syrup, right? That sugar is going to dissolve in water. But these oils, these terpenes, oil and water don't mix very well. Think of dropping olive oil in a pot of water. It's mostly just going to sit on top of that. So in order to pull out all these oil-soluble compounds, that's when you would make a tincture. So regardless of what supplement you're buying, make sure that your mushrooms have been extracted in at least one way, if not both. At Four Sigmatic, you don't have to worry because we do both forms of extraction. I say it's like using the whole animal, right, if you eat meat. So we're pulling out all potential beneficial parts of the fungi itself. And a lot of people think that you need to activate a Four Sigmatic product in hot water, but that's not true. So we've actually done that for you. And all of the powders that you get in your Four Sigmatic product are pre-extracted. So they are ready to go and bioavailable straight from the packet or from the canister or from your bag if you're using ground coffee. And so you can use them in as many ways as you can think of. I encourage you all to get really creative and bake with your mushrooms, put them in a smoothie, add them to coffee, pretty much any way you can think of, the fungi are able to be used in that way. And let's see, are functional mushrooms the same as medicinal mushrooms? So yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up. Both, we kind of used to refer to the mushrooms that we discussed today as medicinal mushrooms, and now we're shifting to talk about them as functional mushrooms. And I personally feel this is an important distinction because in the plant world, right, in the world of herbal medicine, the word medicinal has become pretty associated with cannabis, right? And now in the world of mushrooms, we're seeing this word medicinal become associated with psychedelics and illegal mushrooms. And so to draw that distinction really clearly, we refer to the mushrooms that we use in our Four Sigmatic products, right? They're all legal, safe mushrooms as functional mushrooms. All right, and I think I have time for one more. Aside from these 4 amazing mushrooms, is there another functional mushroom that really excites you? Oh, there's so many more. Let's see. I think we had, oh, I'm like, which way to go? So if you want to learn to grow your own mushrooms, which I encourage all of you to do, it's so fun, and we can do DIY mushroom growing in another webinar perhaps, but oyster mushrooms were the introduction to me growing my own mushrooms as medicine. And they are, although they're more of a culinary variety, they do have nutritional and beneficial compounds to our health. And so that would be a really fun kind of starting point if you guys want to get more hands-on and connect more to the mushrooms in your own home, in your own kitchen. And then, there's a couple other mushrooms that we use across Four Sigmatic products that are so special. It's hard to point out one over the other, but maitake, shiitake, tremella, we have turkey tail. So next time, those are kind of the 4 sub-tier mushrooms that I would love to dive into at a further webinar. So thank you all so much for joining us today and for your questions, and happy, happy, happy National Mushroom Day. Again, I'm Danielle. You can leave your questions below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So hope you have a great rest of your evening and we'll talk soon.